The Avalon Theater wasn't the kind of place people flocked to anymore. It was old, tired, with carpets that had soaked up decades of spilled soda and butter-flavored oil, and posters in the lobby that always seemed a month or two out of date. But Darren liked it that way. He had been the night projectionist for nearly 8 years. The solitude suited him. Most people didn't even know projectionists still existed in the age of digital. But the Avalon clung to its reels, its clunky equipment, its sense of history. From the booth above the main auditorium, Darren could see everything without being seen. He liked the hum of the machines, the smell of warm film stock, the way the reels ticked with steady rhythm. The booth was his kingdom. That night was like most nights, quiet, a midnight showing of a horror flick that had already been streamed by half the town. A small crowd, maybe a dozen people scattered through the seats, sipping their sodas, glowing faintly from their phones before the previews rolled. By 12:30, the film was playing smoothly, reels spinning, the steady mechanical clatter soothing in its repetition. Darren leaned back in his creaky chair, sipping lukewarm coffee, eyes half closed. That's when he heard it. Another projector. At first he thought he was imagining things, maybe the echo of his own reels bouncing strangely. But no, this was different, louder, coming from the next booth over. But there was no next booth. The Avalon had converted half its rooms to digital years ago. The old auxiliary booth had been locked, padlocked shut, and sealed off. Nobody used it anymore. Yet the sound was clear. Reels spinning, gears clicking, film threading through metal teeth. Darren stood slowly. He pressed his ear to the thin wall separating his booth from the sealed one. The noise vibrated through it, rhythmic, alive. "Hello?" he called. The sound stopped. Silence. He waited, pulse quickening. Then it started again, faster now, louder. The reels whipped like they were spinning at double speed. Darren cursed under his breath, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The air outside the booth was colder, stiller, smelling faintly of dust and mold. His footsteps echoed too loudly on the linoleum as he approached the locked door. The padlock was still there, thick, rusted, exactly as it had always been, and yet behind it the machine clattered on. Darren leaned closer, his breath fogged against the cold metal. Then a silence again. He backed away, unsettled, and returned to his booth. He told himself it was his imagination. Maybe sound carrying from somewhere else in the building. Old pipes, faulty wiring. He'd heard weirder, but when he looked out the booth window into the auditorium, his stomach dropped. The movie playing on the screen wasn't the one he had loaded. Instead of the glossy horror film, grainy black and white footage flickered across the screen. It showed the theater itself. Row by row, the camera panned over the 12 people in their seats. But their faces were wrong, distorted, blurred. Like the film stock couldn't quite pin down their features. And then the camera tilted upward, toward the projection booth, toward him. Darren staggered back from the glass. His own outline appeared on the screen, a grainy shadow of himself in the booth window. He yanked the reel off his projector. The machine stuttered, film flapping loose, but the movie didn't stop. The screen kept playing. The camera in the film crept closer to his image in the booth, step by step, frame by frame. Then down below, the audience shifted. One by one, every head tilted back. They weren't watching the screen anymore. They were staring directly at him. Darren's breath caught in his throat. He bolted for the stairs, shoes slamming the metal steps, bursting into the lobby. The concession stand was deserted. The popcorn machine stood silent, half filled with stale kernels. Posters on the walls seemed smeared. The faces of actors blurred into unrecognizable shapes. He pushed out into the night air, gasping. The street outside was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the theater behind him. But through the glass doors he saw it, the glow of the screen inside. The film was still playing, and now on that black and white screen, Darren saw himself. Standing right where he was, outside the theater, staring back through the glass. Frozen, watching. Behind his figure on the screen, movement stirred. In the booth, another man leaned over the projector, feeding reel after reel with mechanical precision. His hands moved steadily, threading film through the machine. His face was hidden in shadow. The projectionist who wasn't there. Darren's body locked in terror. He stumbled backward into the empty street, then turned and ran, the theater's glow shrinking behind him. They say Darren never came back for his shift. A week later, the Avalon shut down. Patrons had started to complain about strange screenings, films that weren't on the schedule, black and white reels playing without sound, footage of themselves on screen, their own movements captured seconds before they happened. And some claimed that when they looked up toward the booth, they saw not one shadow but two. One sitting stiffly in the chair, and another standing just behind, feeding reels into the machine, never stopping. When the building was finally cleared out, the locked booth was opened for the first time in years. There was no projector inside, just a chair, facing the wall, and on that wall, carved deep into the plaster, 3 words scratched again and again: "Reel keeps running." Most employees at the Regal Crown 12 didn't like working the late shift. After midnight, the crowds thinned to almost nothing. The smell of popcorn and soda syrup seemed heavier in the air, and the vast building took on a hollow, abandoned feel. Shadows pooled in the corners of the lobby, and the endless rows of empty auditoriums felt like mouths waiting to swallow you whole. Kayla had worked there for about 6 months. She was used to the weird creaks of the building, the hum of soda machines, the faint rattle of air ducts at night. But she wasn't prepared for what happened the night she was asked to check Theater 6. It was a Tuesday, dead slow. By midnight, the last customers had filtered out, leaving just Kayla, one manager, and a janitor finishing the lobby. The final film had ended around 12:15. The building was supposed to be empty. At 12:30, the phone at the front desk rang. Kayla picked it up. A man's voice, low and irritated, came through the line. "Yeah, I'm in Theater 4 and there's a kid crying. Won't stop. It's coming from the next auditorium, I think. Can someone check it?" Kayla frowned. "You're in Theater 4? Sir, the last show ended half an hour ago. Theater 4 should be empty." There was silence on the line. Then the man said, "I'm telling you, I hear it. Crying. It's coming from Theater 6. Kayla glanced across the lobby. Theater 6's door was shut, the poster case next to it empty because that room had been closed for renovations for weeks. "I'll check it out," she said uncertainly. She hung up, heart already racing, and grabbed her flashlight. The door to Theater 6 opened with a groan, hinges stiff from disuse. The smell hit her first: stale popcorn, damp carpet, the faint tang of mildew. Her beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over rows of seats covered in plastic sheeting. And then she heard it, a child crying, soft at first, muffled, coming from somewhere deep inside the auditorium. "Hello?" she called. Her voice echoed back too loudly. "Is anyone in here?" The crying didn't stop. She stepped between the plastic-covered rows, her shoes whispering against the floor. The sound grew sharper. A child sobbing, catching breaths between cries. "Hey," she tried again, forcing her voice calm. "It's okay, I work here. Where are you?" Her beam swept the rows. Nothing. The crying came from the front now, near the screen. She approached slowly, flashlight shaking. The screen loomed huge and gray in the dark, reflecting nothing. The stage in front of it was bare, except for an old popcorn tub someone had kicked there months ago. But the crying, it was right there. She aimed the light into the front row. A small figure sat slumped in the center seat, shoulders shaking. "Sweetheart," Kayla said softly, "are you lost?" The crying cut off instantly. The figure sat motionless. Her throat tightened. "It's okay. I can help you. Just look at me." Slowly, the figure raised its head. It wasn't a child. The face was pale, stretched, the features blurred like an out-of-focus photograph. The eyes were wide, black, hollow pits. The mouth hung open too far, wider than it should, a perfect O. Kayla gasped and stumbled back. Her flashlight flickered violently, then died. The auditorium plunged into darkness. The crying started again, louder now, surrounding her. It came from the rows to her left, then her right, then behind her. Dozens of children sobbing, wailing, filling the air until it rattled in her skull. She bolted for the exit, hands shaking as she shoved the heavy door open. She spilled into the lobby, gasping for breath, flashlight clattering on the tile. The crying stopped. Her manager, Frank, looked up from paperwork at the concession counter. "What the hell's wrong with you?" "Theater 6, Kayla stammered. There's someone in there." Frank frowned. "That's impossible. Theater 6 has been locked down for a month. No shows, no access." "No," she said, voice shaking. "I saw them, a kid, and then..." She couldn't finish. Frank sighed, grabbed his keys, and marched to Theater 6. Kayla trailed after, still trembling. He pushed the door open, flicked on the house lights. Rows of plastic-covered seats, a dusty screen. Silence. "See," he said, "empty, always was." Kayla stared, wide-eyed. Then she saw the seat in the front row. The plastic covering it was gone. The cushion was worn, indented, as if someone had been sitting there for hours. And resting on the armrest was a child's stuffed rabbit. Its button eyes stared blankly at her. Kayla quit the next morning. Later, she learned something she wished she hadn't. Years earlier, during a packed summer matinee, a child had wandered away from her mother in Theater 6. The lights dimmed, the crowd laughed, and when the credits rolled, the girl never came back. They searched for days, tore the place apart. No one ever found her. Some employees still whisper that if you're unlucky enough to check Theater 6 at night, you'll hear her crying. And if you answer her, she won't be alone. The storage room in the old Majestic Cinema was like a graveyard. Stacks of dusty popcorn tubs, broken arcade machines, film canisters piled so high the labels had faded to nothing. The place smelled of mildew and burnt dust from old wiring. Nobody went in there unless they had to. Eddie, one of the assistant managers, hated it most of all. But one night, while clearing out storage for renovations, he stumbled across something strange. A plain, rusted film canister shoved at the very back of a shelf. No label, no title. Just a piece of tape across the lid with one word scrawled in marker, "Don't." He carried it out to the lobby, chuckling nervously as he showed the others. "Look what I found. Think it's one of those lost classics?" The janitor wrinkled his nose. "Probably trash, toss it." But Eddie's curiosity got the better of him. That night after closing, he threaded the reel onto one of the old projectors in Theater 9. The place hadn't been used in months, so he figured no one would care. By 1 a.m., a few staff had gathered. Eddie, Kayla the ticket girl, Frank the manager, and Luis the janitor. They sat scattered in the seats, joking about finding a secret horror movie. The lights dimmed, the projector clicked to life. At first, it was nothing unusual. Scratchy black and white footage, grainy and silent. But then the camera tilted and they all stiffened. The film was showing the Majestic itself, the very auditorium they sat in. Row by row, the camera panned over the empty seats, moving slowly, deliberately. Then it shifted upward to the booth where Eddie was operating the projector. Kayla laughed nervously. "Okay, creepy, how old is this?" Eddie frowned, shaking his head. "I don't know. I've never seen it before." The camera on screen zoomed closer to the booth window, closer, and then a figure appeared. A projectionist, but not Eddie. This one was taller, hunched, wearing a torn coat. His face was shadowed, but his hands moved steadily, feeding reel after reel through the machine. "Turn it off," Luis muttered. "This is messed up." Eddie reached for the controls, but the projector kept whirring. The film didn't stop. On screen, the camera panned back down into the auditorium. And now it wasn't empty. It showed them. The four of them sitting in the exact same seats, staring at the screen, their grainy, flickering faces staring back in black and white. Frank stood abruptly. "All right, enough, shut it down." Eddie yanked the power. Sparks flickered. The projector groaned, then fell silent. But the screen didn't go dark. The film kept playing. On screen, the grainy version of Frank stood from his seat, just as he had. Then Kayla turned her head. Then Luis. The film mirrored every movement seconds before they made it. Eddie whispered, It's ahead of us." Then the projection changed. The grainy Frank walked up the aisle, but instead of stopping at the door, his figure on the screen turned sharply into the shadows and disappeared. "Hell no," Frank muttered, backing toward the exit. On screen, the grainy Frank backed toward the exit too, but as he reached the door, a hand shot out of the darkness, gripping his throat. Frank froze, his real body trembling. "This isn't real," he whispered. The film showed his figure being dragged backward into the shadows, kicking, clawing, before vanishing entirely. The seat he had left in real life was now empty. Frank turned to run, but before he could reach the door, the lights flickered, and when they came back, his seat was empty too. The three left screamed. The film shifted again, showing Kayla sobbing in her chair. On screen, she turned her head, and a pale, blurred face leaned inches from hers, whispering something inaudible. Kayla shrieked in real life, scrambling for the aisle. Eddie grabbed her arm, but her seat on the screen was already empty. She never made it to the door. Eddie and Luis were the only ones left. The film showed Luis trembling, eyes wide. On screen, a figure climbed down the theater wall like an insect, its limbs bent at wrong angles, moving toward him. Luis bolted up the aisle, cursing, but as Eddie blinked, his seat was gone too. The film lingered on Eddie, sitting alone in the theater. And then, the camera moved closer, closer, until Eddie saw himself on the screen, sitting in the booth, staring back. His own terrified eyes flickered in black and white. He backed away from the projector, heart hammering. No, no, no. The film cut to black, silence. Then words scratched across the screen, shaky, uneven, as if carved into the film stock itself. "Now it's your turn." The lights came on. The theater was empty. No Frank, no Kayla, no Luis. Just Eddie. He stumbled out into the lobby, searching frantically, calling their names. Nothing. Their coats still hung on the rack. Their cars still sat in the lot outside. But they were gone. Days later, when corporate came looking, Eddie tried to explain, tried to show them the real. But when they opened the projector, the canister was empty. No film, just a scrap of paper curled inside the reel, smeared with something dark. 3 words. "Reel keeps running." If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.